The grand ballroom of the hotel glittered under the chandeliers, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the air. I adjusted the little pink bow in my daughter's hair, my heart pounding against my ribs as we stepped inside. This was supposed to be a normal night. A business event, a hotel opening party, a chance to network and catch up with old acquaintances. But life had a twisted sense of humor, and as fate would have it, my past was waiting for me in the middle of the crowded room. I saw him before he saw me. Tall, effortlessly confident, his broad shoulders filling out the sleek black suit he wore. His presence commanded attention, just like it always had. The years had only sharpened his looks: messy dark hair, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes that could pin you in place if you weren't careful. And damn it, I wasn't careful. Because the moment his gaze swept over the room and landed on me, on us, his entire body stiffened. His drink froze midway to his lips. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face, then something deeper. Something I couldn't read. He hadn't seen me in 6 years. Hadn't seen me since the night we shared a bed, tangled up in sheets and the reckless haze of alcohol at my best friend's wedding. Hadn't seen me since he disappeared without a single word, vanishing from my life like a ghost, as if that night had never happened. But what he had definitely never seen before was the little girl gripping my hand. Our daughter. To be honest, I never liked him growing up. Ethan Carter was my best friend's older brother, the insufferable, arrogant, too cocky for his own good Ethan Carter. He was 4 years older than us, and he made it his life's mission to get under my skin. It started with harmless teasing of pulling my ponytail, calling me Shorty, hiding my favorite books whenever I left them unattended at their house. But as we got older, it turned into sarcastic comments, endless eye rolls, and a ridiculous amount of smirking whenever I got flustered. I could not stand him, and the feeling was mutual. While my best friend, Olivia, adored her brother, I found him to be the most annoying human being on the planet. He was the guy who never took anything seriously, who always had some smart-ass remark ready to fire, who looked at me like I was an overdramatic kid throwing tantrums even when I had a perfectly valid reason to be mad. And yet, despite all the years of bickering, something changed at Olivia's wedding. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the way he looked at me differently that night, like he was actually seeing me for the first time. Or maybe it was just my own damn loneliness that made me do something so stupid. But one moment, we were standing at the open bar, exchanging sarcastic banter as usual. The next, we were on the dance floor, my hands pressed against his shoulders, his hands gripping my waist. The tension had been brewing all night, crackling in the air like static. I should have walked away when the first spark ignited. Instead, we ended up in his hotel room. And everything I thought I knew about Ethan Carter, his arrogance, his smugness, his ability to drive me crazy, shattered in that one night. Because he didn't just kiss like he was trying to shut me up. He kissed me like he had been waiting for that moment for years. Like he wanted me. Like I was something more than just his little sister's best friend. And God help me, but I wanted him too. I woke up the next morning with a pounding headache, tangled in expensive sheets, and wrapped in Ethan's warmth. For a brief, fleeting second, it felt perfect. Then reality hit me like a slap to the face. I was in bed with my best friend's brother, the guy I swore I could not stand. And before I could process what the hell had happened, he was gone. Just gone. No note. No text. No goodbye. 2 days later, Olivia casually mentioned that Ethan had left the country for a new job overseas. Every voicemail and messages I sent were left unanswered. I pretended like it didn't matter. I pretended like it hadn't hurt. I pretended like I wasn't already feeling the first signs of nausea. Because 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Mama, why is that man looking at us like that? My daughter's small voice pulled me back to the present, and I tore my gaze away from Ethan's stunned expression. I knelt down beside her, smoothing out the ruffles of her pink dress, trying to keep my hands from shaking. He's just surprised to see us, sweetie. That was an understatement. Ethan hadn't moved from his spot, still standing frozen in place, his fingers tight around his whiskey glass. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand tall. I had imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed the words I would say, planned how I would tell him about our daughter, about the years he missed, about the little girl who had his eyes and his stubbornness. But when he finally took a step toward us, his voice hoarse and disbelieving Ava, I realized I wasn't ready at all. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't heard him say my name in over 5 years, yet here he was, standing a few feet away, looking at me like I was something he had lost and never expected to find again. My daughter, our daughter, fidgeted beside me, her tiny hand tightening around mine. I could feel her eyes flicking between Ethan and me, curious but cautious, sensing the tension in the air. Ethan took another step closer, his gaze shifting from me to the little girl at my side. His fingers twitched like he wanted to reach out, but didn't know if he was allowed to. I opened my mouth, my throat dry. Ethan, his eyes locked onto mine. She's mine, isn't she? There was no accusation in his tone. No anger. Just quiet devastation. I could have lied. I could have dodged the question. But what was the point? I exhaled shakily, nodding. Yes, she's yours. His entire body went rigid, his grip tightening around his whiskey glass until I thought it might shatter. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared. Then, barely above a whisper, "What's her name?" My chest ached. I glanced down at my daughter, who was now watching Ethan with wide, curious eyes. "Emma," I said softly. "Her name is Emma." Ethan let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside him for years. He stared at her, taking in every detail, the soft curls that framed her round face, the dimple in her cheek when she nervously bit her lip, the same piercing blue eyes that looked too much like his. His daughter. Emma tilted her head. "Are you okay, mister?" Ethan let out a choked laugh, running a hand over his jaw. Yeah, I think I am. But I wasn't. Because I knew this was only the beginning. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I barely remembered the conversations I had, the polite smiles I forced, the way my hands trembled when I excused myself to take Emma home. I had almost made it out of the hotel lobby when I heard him behind me. "Ava, wait." I froze. Slowly, I turned to find Ethan standing a few steps away, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. I let out a dry laugh. "Oh, now you want to talk?" He flinched. 6 years, Ethan." My voice shook with restrained anger. 6 years, and you never once reached out. Never once thought to check if I cut myself off, shaking my head. "No, you don't get to come back and act like we can just talk about this like it's nothing." His jaw clenched. "It's not nothing. And you know that." I swallowed hard, glancing at Emma, who was now distractedly humming to herself as she played with the hem of her dress. I sighed. "Not here. Let's meet at Block Cafe." His eyes flicked to Emma. "Tomorrow." A lump formed in my throat. This was happening. I gave him a small, reluctant nod. Tomorrow. I barely slept that night. By the time the sun rose, my stomach was in knots. I wasn't ready for this conversation. I wasn't ready to dig up old wounds, to hear whatever excuses Ethan had for walking away, for leaving without a word. But I had no choice now. I met him at a quiet cafe, one far from curious eyes and gossiping mouths. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, his fingers wrapped around a coffee cup, his gaze distant. For a second, he looked almost lost. Then he saw me, and that same unreadable expression settled back onto his face. I took a deep breath and sat down. Ethan was the first to speak. "I didn't know." I scoffed. "Yeah, no kidding." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I mean it, Ava. I didn't know." If I had, he cut himself off, shaking his head. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stiffened. "You left." That's not an answer. I looked away, gripping my coffee cup tightly. "I didn't think it would matter to you." He cursed under his breath. "It would have mattered." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Oh, really? Because you left without a goodbye, Ethan. You didn't even have the decency to pick up my calls, read my texts, listen to my voicemails, or send a damn text." What was I supposed to think? His hands curled into fists on the table. I left because I had to. I got a job offer overseas, something I couldn't turn down. I thought if I stayed. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. I thought it was for the best. I stared at him in disbelief. For the best. He met my gaze, his expression full of regret. Ava, I was a mess back then. I didn't have my life together. I was traveling, working insane hours, barely sleeping. I thought I'd just drag you into my chaos if I stayed. I clenched my jaw. So you made that decision for me? Silence. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled. I messed up. A small, humorless smile tugged at my lips. Yeah, you did. His fingers tapped against the table. I want to be in her life. My heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. She's not just a responsibility to take on, Ethan, I whispered. She's a little girl who doesn't even know who you are. I know, he said quietly. But I want to fix that. For the first time since he had reappeared in my life, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Determination. Regret. Hope. And just like that, I knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Emma sat across from me at the breakfast table, swinging her little legs as she chomped on a piece of toast. The sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over her curls. She was humming, probably making up a song in her head the way she always did. I, on the other hand, was staring blankly at my coffee. Ethan wanted to be in her life. It was the only thought occupying my mind, looping over and over like a broken record. Mommy? I blinked, focusing on Emma's big blue eyes. The same ones that haunted me last night, the ones she shared with Ethan. Yes, baby. She tilted her head, crumbs clinging to the corners of her lips. Who was that man at the party? I nearly dropped my coffee cup. My throat felt tight. What do you mean? The one who looked at me like he knew me. She furrowed her brows, and then looked at you like he wanted to fight you. I huffed out a nervous laugh. He wasn't going to fight me. Emma shrugged, unconvinced. So, do you know him? I hesitated. There was no easy way to say this. His name is Ethan. She scrunched her nose. Ethan? I nodded. He's someone I used to know. Emma chewed on that for a moment. Then, with the same blunt honesty she always had, she asked, "Is he my daddy?" My heart nearly stopped. I had planned to ease her into it, to have a careful conversation at the right time. But this was Emma, smart, observant, and always 2 steps ahead of me. I swallowed hard. Yes, baby. He is. Silence stretched between us. Emma blinked, looking down at her plate. Okay. That was it? I watched her closely, trying to gauge her reaction, but she just kept eating, her little mind working through everything I had just told her. Finally, she licked some jam off her finger and asked, "Is he nice?" I exhaled slowly. I don't know yet. Emma seemed to accept that answer because she nodded, took one last bite of her toast, and hopped off her chair. Can I watch cartoons now? I let out a small laugh, my heart heavy. Go ahead, baby. As she ran off, I leaned back in my chair, pressing my fingers against my temples. Ethan wanted to be in her life. And now Emma knew who he was. There was no turning back now. Ethan showed up at the park that afternoon. I had told him we could meet somewhere neutral, somewhere Emma would feel comfortable. He agreed without argument, and now here we were, standing in an open field, watching her climb the jungle gym like she was training for the Olympics. Ethan was stiff beside me, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes glued to Emma. She's beautiful, he murmured. I nodded, unable to stop the small smile tugging at my lips. She is. We fell into silence, watching as Emma slid down the slide and raced toward the swings. She doesn't seem upset, Ethan observed. She processes things differently, I said. She's curious, but she won't ask until she's ready. Ethan nodded slowly, exhaling deeply. I don't know how to do this, Ava. I turned to him, studying his face. I don't expect you to figure it out in a day, I admitted. But if you're serious about this, then you need to show up. Every time. He met my gaze, something raw in his expression. I will. Emma came running toward us then, her cheeks flushed from playing. She stopped in front of Ethan, looking up at him with wide eyes. You have the same eyes as me, she announced. Ethan let out a breathless laugh. I guess I do. Emma studied him for a long moment before finally tilting her head. Do you like ice cream? Ethan blinked, clearly thrown off by the question. Yeah. I do. Emma grinned. Good. Because I want some. I shook my head, laughing softly. You just had lunch. But I'm still hungry, she pouted. Ethan smirked. I think that's code for Mom. Please let me have ice cream. Emma gasped dramatically. You speak my language? Ethan chuckled, crouching down to her level. I do. I used to be a kid too, you know. Emma narrowed her eyes, skeptical. I don't know. You look old. I burst out laughing. Ethan looked up at me, mock offended. Did she just call me old? I shrugged. She's not wrong. He groaned, rubbing his face. Emma giggled, clearly pleased with herself. Then, without warning, she reached out and took Ethan's hand. My breath hitched. Ethan stiffened, startled by the small gesture. But then he relaxed, wrapping his fingers around hers. And in that moment, something shifted. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't just looking at Ethan, the guy who had left without a goodbye. I was looking at Ethan, the man who had just met his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, we could figure this out together. Ethan kept holding Emma's hand as we walked to the nearest ice cream stand, and I didn't know how to feel about it. It was surreal watching them together, like stepping into a dream I hadn't dared to imagine. I had spent years preparing myself for the possibility that Ethan might never know Emma, and now, here he was, standing beside me, picking out ice cream flavors with her like he hadn't missed 5 years of her life. Emma bounced excitedly as she pointed at the display. I want chocolate chip cookie dough. No. Wait. Mint chocolate chip. Or can I have both? Ethan smirked, glancing at me. What's the verdict, Mom? I sighed. Just 1 scoop. Emma pouted, but Ethan winked at her. Don't worry, kiddo. I got you. I shot him a warning look. Ethan. He held his hands up in surrender. I'm just saying, what kind of dad would I be if I didn't spoil her a little? I stiffened at the word dad. He said it so casually, like he had always been here. Emma, however, was too busy choosing her flavor to notice the tension. When we finally got our ice cream and found a bench, Emma swung her legs happily, chatting between bites. I like princess movies, but I also like dinosaurs, she announced. Mom says I should pick one for my birthday theme, but I want both. Ethan chuckled. A dinosaur princess party? That sounds awesome. Emma gasped. Right. Mom doesn't get it. I rolled my eyes. It's not that I don't get it, it's just hard to find T-Rexes wearing crowns on decorations. Emma shrugged. Then we make our own decorations. Ethan smiled. That's a great idea. I sighed. Now you're encouraging her. Of course. It's my job. There it was again. My job. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach, but Ethan must have noticed because his gaze softened. Ava, he said quietly. Can we talk? I hesitated. Emma was still focused on her ice cream, humming to herself, so I nodded. Ethan looked down at his cup, as if searching for the right words. I know I don't deserve this. I don't deserve a place in her life after being gone for so long. But I want to try. I swallowed hard. It's not just about what you want, Ethan. Emma needs consistency. She needs to know she can rely on you. I know. His voice was firm. That's why I'm staying. My head snapped up. What? He met my eyes. I'm staying in the country. For good. I stared at him, trying to process his words. For good? Ethan had always been restless, always moving, always running. The idea of him putting down roots was almost impossible to believe. But the way he looked at Emma, the way he held her hand, listened to her ramble, smiled at her like she was the best thing he'd ever seen, I knew he was serious. Emma suddenly piped up, licking her spoon. Does that mean I get to see you more? Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. Yeah, kiddo. It does. She grinned. Cool. Just like that. No hesitation. No resentment. My daughter was giving Ethan a chance. And maybe, just maybe, I could too. Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch watching her favorite dinosaur documentary, Ethan and I sat in the dimly lit living room. It felt strange having him here in my home after all these years. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I know you probably don't believe me, but I never meant to leave the way I did. I folded my arms. You didn't even say goodbye, Ethan. One day you were there, and the next, you were gone. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I was scared. I scoffed. Of what? Me? No, his voice was quiet. Of what I felt for you. I stilled. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with something raw. You weren't just Ava, my sister's best friend who used to annoy the hell out of me. You were Ava, the woman I couldn't stop thinking about. And that night after the wedding, he trailed off, shaking his head. I panicked. I wasn't ready for what it meant. My throat tightened. So you ran. He nodded. And it was the biggest mistake of my life. Silence stretched between us. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell, to tell him how much he had hurt me. But then I thought of Emma. I thought of how she had smiled at him, how easily she had accepted him into her world. Maybe I couldn't forgive him overnight. But for her, I could try. I took a deep breath. If you're serious about this, about being in Emma's life, you need to prove it. Ethan nodded. I will. I held his gaze for a long moment before finally standing up. Then let's take it one step at a time. Ethan smiled, a small, hopeful smile. One step at a time. And for the first time in 6 years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. Together. Ethan kept his word. For the next few weeks, he showed up every single time. He picked Emma up from school when I had late meetings. He sat with her in the living room, listening to her endless dinosaur facts. He even endured a princess tea party where he had to wear a plastic tiara, much to Emma's delight. And slowly, against my better judgment, I started to trust him again. One evening, as I stood in the doorway watching them build a pillow fort, Emma giggled as Ethan pretended to be a dragon guarding the entrance. You can't come in unless you answer my riddle, he said in a deep, dramatic voice. Emma placed her hands on her hips. Okay, dragon. What's the riddle? Ethan smirked. What has to be broken before you can use it? Emma's face scrunched up in thought. A glow stick? Ethan blinked. That's actually a good answer. But nope. Try again. Emma tapped her chin. Then her face lit up. An egg. Ethan grinned. Ding ding ding. You win, princess. Emma cheered and crawled into the fort, tugging Ethan with her. Come on, Dragon Daddy. I froze. Dragon Daddy. It wasn't just Ethan anymore. It was Daddy. Ethan stilled too, his eyes meeting mine. Neither of us said a word, but in that moment I knew this wasn't temporary for him. He was here. And he wasn't going anywhere. Later that night, after putting Emma to bed, Ethan and I found ourselves sitting on the balcony, sipping coffee. The air was cool, the city lights glowing in the distance. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. She called you Daddy today. Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah. I glanced at him. How do you feel about that? He turned to me, his blue eyes serious. Honored. Terrified. Like I just got the most important job in the world, and I can't mess it up. I smiled softly. Welcome to parenthood. He chuckled. Yeah. Guess I'm a little late to the game. I shook my head. Better late than never. Ethan studied me for a moment. What about us? I stiffened. What about us? He set his cup down. Ava, I know I screwed up. But I never stopped thinking about you. And now that I'm back, now that I know what I have to lose, I don't want to waste any more time. My heart pounded. I wanted to believe him. But I also knew how badly I had been hurt before. I don't know if I can do this again. Ethan, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. Then let me prove to you that you can. I looked down at our intertwined fingers, my walls slowly cracking. one step at a time. That's what we had agreed on. Maybe, just maybe, this was the next step. Weeks turned into months, and before I knew it, life had settled into a new rhythm. Emma and Ethan had become inseparable. She introduced him to her favorite books, made him sit through endless tea parties, and even roped him into dressing up for Dinosaur Princess Day at her school. And me? I was slowly learning to let him in again. One evening, as I was tidying up the living room, I'd heard soft giggles from Emma's room, then silence. Curious, I peeked inside. Ethan was lying on the floor, Emma sprawled on his chest, both of them fast asleep. My heart clenched. This was what I had dreamed of for so long. A family. I stepped closer, brushing a stray curl from Emma's forehead. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Then, without thinking, I whispered, "I love you." Ethan's eyes fluttered open. For a second, I froze, realizing what I had just said. But instead of looking surprised, he smiled, soft and full of warmth. "I love you too, Ava." And just like that, I knew. Ethan was home. For good. 3 years later. The backyard was filled with laughter and the scent of freshly baked cake. Fairy lights twinkled overhead as friends and family gathered, celebrating Emma's 8th birthday. She wore a pink dress with a dinosaur print, a tiara sitting proudly on her curls as she ran around with her friends. I stood by the patio, a hand resting on my slightly rounded belly, watching her with a soft smile. A tiny hand tugged at my dress. "Mama, up." I looked down at my 2-year-old son, Oliver, our little surprise. His chubby cheeks were flushed, dark curls a mess from running around. He had Ethan's piercing blue eyes, but my mischievous grin. I scooped him up, groaning playfully. "Ollie, you're getting too big for this." "Big boy," he declared proudly, wrapping his arms around my neck. A pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and I leaned back into Ethan's embrace. "She looks happy," he murmured against my ear, nodding at Emma. "She is," I whispered. "We all are." His hand covered mine on my stomach, his thumb brushing gentle circles over the fabric of my dress. "And soon, we'll have another little one to add to the chaos." I sighed dramatically. 3 kids. You realize we're officially outnumbered now, right? Ethan chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Good thing I'm great at handling chaos." That's debatable." "Hey," he protested, turning me around to face him. "I think I'm doing a pretty good job so far." I smiled up at him, my heart swelling at the sight of my husband, the man I had once thought would never stay, now the rock of our family. "I guess I'll keep you around," I teased. Ethan smirked. "You don't really have a choice, Mrs. Carter." Emma's voice rang through the air. "Gross." We turned to see her standing with her hands on her hips, Oliver giggling in my arms. "Are you guys kissing again?" she groaned. Ethan scooped her up effortlessly with his free arm. "Better get used to it, kiddo. Your mom's my favorite person." Emma giggled. "Okay, but can we do cake now?" Ethan glanced at me. "Cake, Mrs. Carter?" I smiled, feeling the baby kick softly inside me. "Cake it is." As our children cheered and the party carried on around us, I looked at the man who had once been nothing more than an annoyance, then a mistake, and now my forever. And I knew, without a doubt, that everything had happened exactly the way it was meant to.